My 5-year-old daughter whispered from her hospital bed, "Daddy, please don't leave me alone with Grandma again." My wife insisted our daughter was making up stories. But when the doctor showed us her injuries, the entire room went silent. But before I begin, I want to make an important announcement about our channel. For the past 5 months, our channel has not been monetized, which means I'm not earning any money from YouTube ads. There are currently no ads running on our videos. Because of this, I also have to work another job, which makes it difficult for me to upload videos daily. If you enjoy our content and want to support the channel, please consider donating just $1. $1 may seem small, but if everyone supports together, it can make a huge difference and help keep this channel active. Your support will help me spend more time creating stories and uploading videos consistently instead of working another job. Of course, you can donate any amount you would like, and every donation truly helps and means a lot to me. To support the channel, please click the donation link in the video description or pin comment. You can also scan the QR code shown on the screen to donate quickly and easily. Thank you so much for supporting. Now, let's dive into today's story. Maple Hollow, Ohio was the kind of town where people waved from porches without knowing why, where every Friday night smelled like grilled meat and freshly cut grass, where neighbors called each other by first name and left casseroles on doorsteps after funerals. The kind of place that looked from the right distance and in the right light, exactly like the idea of a good life. From the outside, the Garrison house looked exactly like every other house on Birchwood Lane. A two-story colonial with dark green shutters. A flower bed that Trevin kept trimmed on weekends. Without being asked, a basketball hoop in the driveway that Noelle would not seriously use for another decade, but had insisted on when she turned 5, because some things are about the idea of something rather than the thing itself. Trevin had bought this house holding a specific image in his head. Holidays around a full table. Voices overlapping in the kitchen. A daughter who would grow up knowing she was safe inside. These walls that the floor would hold, that the adults in the room were watching out for her, that home meant something reliable. That image had been breaking slowly, over months, the way a bone fractures underweight that. Builds too quietly to feel until it finally snaps. Tonight, the kitchen smelled like pot roast, and something warm had fogged the window above the sink. Noelle sat at the table in her usual chair, the one closest to the wall, with her plate pushed. One careful inch from the edge, the way Trevin had taught her. She was 6 years old, dark curly, hair that she wore in 2 uneven pigtails she had fixed herself this morning. Brown eyes that still held a kind of wonder the world had not yet worn away. She had her mother's jaw and Trevin's stubborn posture, and tonight she was very carefully trying to eat without making any noise. That was new. It had started about 7 months ago. Trevin sat across from her. He was watching without appearing to watch, a skill built slowly, through months of needing it, taking note of everything without looking like he was taking note of anything. Diane Pell sat at the far end of the table. She had moved in 11 months ago after losing her apartment. The explanation shifted every time. Trevin asked about it. First it was a landlord dispute, then mold, then money that had dried up, then simply these things happened delivered in the tone of someone who had learned that vague. Answers are harder to argue with than specific ones. Diane was tall and silver-haired in her late 50s, with the kind of presence that felt less like warmth and more like occupation. She wore her opinions the way other people wear cologne, constant, unasked for, and impossible to ignore after a certain point. Since Diane moved in, the house had changed. Not all at once. That was the cruelest part. The change came in degrees that were easy to dismiss, individually and impossible to ignore collectively. Noelle stopped laughing at the dinner table first. Then she stopped bringing her drawings downstairs to show Trevin after school. Then she started waking up at odd hours, 2 in the morning, 3, and padding silently to Trevin's side of the bed instead of her mother's. He would hear the small sound of the door, feel the slight shift in the mattress, and he would lie still and pretend to be asleep while Noelle settled carefully beside him, as if she did not want to burden him with the fact that she needed to be there. Trevin noticed all of it. Kendra did not seem to, or she chose not to. He had stopped being sure which one it was, and lately, that distinction had begun to matter less. Tonight, Noelle was pushing peas around her plate in small, careful movements. She was watching her food with the kind of focused patience that children use when they are hoping to become invisible inside a room. Diane looked up from her own plate. "She's too sensitive," she said. Not to Noelle, not to Trevin, just out loud, into the air between them, the way she issued most of her observations, as if they were weather reports. Factual, inarguable, not open for discussion. Every little thing makes her cry. You can't raise a girl that way. Noelle lowered her head immediately. The motion was automatic, almost mechanical, like a reflex trained by repetition into something that no longer required thought. That small motion, that one small thing, hit Trevin somewhere behind his sternum. He held his fork and said nothing. Kendra kept eating without looking up. Her voice was flat when she spoke, the kind of flat that comes from saying the same thing so many times it has lost all its texture. "Mom's right. You baby her too much, Trevin. She needs to toughen up." Trevin set his fork down slowly. Noelle had not cried tonight. She had not thrown anything or screamed or done anything except try to be quiet and small and out of the way. And the two women at this table sat perfectly aligned, the way they had been aligned since Diane walked through his front door with two suitcases and an air of permanence, and Trevin sat across from his daughter and thought about the word toughen. He looked at Noelle. She was staring at her peas. He picked his fork back up. He ate. He said nothing, but something had already shifted inside him. A decision forming slowly, the way water freezes. Not in a single instant, but degree by degree, until the surface finally holds no movement at all and becomes something you could stand on. 20 minutes later, Noelle reached for her cup and caught the edge of it wrong. The milk went sideways in a slow, inevitable arc and spread across the table in a white sheet, reaching the edge. Before anyone had moved, Diane slammed her open palm on the table. The sound exploded through the kitchen like a crack of wood splitting. Noelle's entire body lurched in her chair. Her shoulders shot up around her ears. Her eyes went wide and wet in the particular way that happens when a body has already learned through repetition to anticipate what comes after a sound like that. For God's sake, Diane's voice was high and sharp. Every single time, every single meal there is something. It had not happened before. Not this specific spill, but the way Diane said it every single time, as if she were reading from a list of evidence she had been compiling, turned a 6-year-old's accident into something deserving of a verdict. Noelle started shaking. Trevin was already standing. He had not decided to stand. His body had simply done it. He was on his feet with both hands flat on, the table and his voice already coming out. Not loud, but very, very clear. "That's enough." Diane looked at him. Her expression moved through surprise and arrived, in less than a second, at offense. The particular practiced offense of a person unaccustomed to being told no by anyone in a room she considers hers. "Oh, please," she said. Her voice took on the tired, superior quality she used when she was making a point she felt should have been understood long ago. Children need discipline, Trevin. Real discipline. You cannot let every little thing go without consequence, or you end up with someone who cannot handle the world. You don't scream at my daughter. The word "my" dropped between them like something thrown. Kendra stood. Trevin had watched this sequence enough times to recognize it before it arrived. The way she always rose to meet a conflict the moment it threatened her mother. The way her body oriented automatically toward Diane, like a compass needle finding north. "Don't talk to my mother like that," Kendra said. Her arms were crossed. Her chin was lifted. Her eyes held Trevin with an expression that had started somewhere in the past 11 months, feeling less like the look of someone who loved him and more like the look of someone who had chosen a side. Noelle sat very still in her chair, with her hands flat in her lap and her eyes on her plate. Not once, during any part of this, the slam, the shouting, the escalation, the two adults standing. Had either Kendra or Diane looked directly at Noelle, not to check whether she was all right, not to say it was an accident and accidents happen and she should not feel bad, not to simply acknowledge that she was there and that she was 6 years old and that she was shaking. That absence, that specific, chosen absence, settled on Trevin's chest like weight. He went to the pantry, took the roll of paper towels, and cleaned up the milk himself. Noelle watched him do it. He gave her a look that was very small and very private, a look that said, without words, I see you. You did nothing wrong. You are fine. She looked back at him the way children look at the one reliable thing in the room. After dinner, Trevin took Noelle upstairs for the nighttime routine. They had a ritual built carefully over years. Brush teeth, wash face, 3 minutes of reading before lights out. A small, consistent architecture that told a child the world could be trusted. That tomorrow would look like today in the ways that mattered. That home was a place with a predictable shape. In the bathroom, Noelle climbed onto the step stool at the sink. Trevin put the toothpaste on her brush the way she liked it. Not too much, just a thin line, and handed it over. She reached for it, and her sleeve slid back. Trevin saw the bruise, dark purple, deep, shaped unmistakably like the grip of fingers, spread across the back of her left shoulder, visible in the overhead light with a clarity that left no room for alternate interpretations. He kept his face still. He kept his breathing even. He felt his hands go cold, and he managed both off these things at the same time, because the moment required it. He crouched down in Noelle's, eye level the way he always did when something serious needed to be said between them. He kept his voice very quiet and very unhurried. Noelle, can you tell me about this? On your shoulder. The little girl froze. The toothbrush hung in her mouth. Then she took it out slowly, and her eyes filled up in the way they do when a child has been holding something she was told not to release. Grandma got mad, she whispered, because I touched her sewing stuff. She left it on the table. Andy just wanted to look at the spools. Trevin waited. He gave her the silence. She grabbed me. Noelle's voice dropped even lower. Almost no sound at all. Really hard. And then she pushed me into the wall. The room was very still. The faucet dripped. Trevin could hear the particular rhythm of his own heartbeat, and he was managing it the way he managed things from the inside out from some quiet center. Has this happened before? He asked. Not just this. Any other time she grabbed you or pushed you? Noelle looked down at her toothbrush for a long moment. She did not answer. But the silence was an answer. Trevin stood, took his phone from his back pocket, and photographed the bruise with careful, methodical attention. Multiple angles. Clear lighting. He worked the way he worked when something needed to be done correctly and permanently. His hands felt distant from him, the way hands feel in the first minutes of shock, before the body catches up to what the mind already knows. He had just lowered the phone when Kendra appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene in a single, quick sweep. Noelle on the step stool, Trevin holding his phone, the specific tension hanging in the room. For one brief, unguarded moment, something raw moved across Kendra's face. Trevin saw it clearly that it was not guilt. It was not the protective fury of a mother confronted with evidence that her child had been hurt. It was not grief or sorrow or the kind of devastated love that should have been thinly reasonable response to what was visible on their daughter's shoulder. It was panic. She stepped forward quickly and grabbed Trevin's wrist with both hands. Delete those. Her voice was low and urgent, pressed close to a whisper, the way people speak when they are terrified of being overheard. Trevin looked at her hands on his arm. He looked at her face. He looked at his wife of 7 years standing in the bathroom doorway, asking him to erase photographic evidence of their daughter's injuries. What, he said, not because he had not heard her, because he needed her to hear herself. She didn't mean it. The words came out clipped and controlled. Mom gets overwhelmed. She loses control sometimes. She has her own history. She's been through things you don't understand. And it's not what it looks like when you photograph it like some kind of crime scene. Trevin pulled his arm back. Slow, deliberate. You knew, he said. The two words sat there between them. Kendra's eyes filled immediately. You don't understand what she's been through, what she carries, the things she's dealt with her whole life. You never try to understand her. You just decide what you think and know. Trevin's voice was entirely level. Not raised. Not hard. Just clear, the way things are clear when they have been decided. You don't understand what is happening to our daughter. He put his phone in his pocket. He walked past Kendra into the hallway. What happened downstairs that night was not the first argument in that house. Arguments had become familiar by now. The same orbits, the same gravity pulling them back to the same center. But this one was different because for the first time, everyone stopped pretending it was about something manageable. Kendra followed Trevin downstairs. They spoke in tight, compressed voices in the hallway. The kind of conversation that happens while a child is above you and both people are aware of it. But Diane heard them from the living room, and Diane did not manage situations. She occupied them. She appeared in the doorway with the energy of someone who had been waiting to enter. She's turning him against me. Diane's voice filled the room immediately. She stood in the doorway with one hand braced against the frame, as if the architecture needed her to hold it. Working at it since the day I moved in. Whispering, building a case, making everything about what he thinks and how he feels, and meanwhile, she is 6 years old. Trevin's voice cut through hers. Not a shout, something slower than that. The kind of voice that is already decided and does not need volume to prove it. She is 6 years old and she cannot turn anyone against anyone. She cannot do anything except be a child in a house where she is not safe. Upstairs, Noelle had gone completely still. Trevin could feel it, the held quality of a child lying in her bed, listening to the floor below her, learning through sound and silence what the world felt like tonight. "Don't raise your voice in my daughter's house," Diane said. "This is not your house," Trevin said. "You do not pay for it. You do not maintain it. You are a guest here. And guests do not put their hands on children." "Trevin," Kendra said. Her voice had that particular fracture it got when she was trying to hold two things together that could not be held. "There's a bruise on Noelle's shoulder, shaped like a hand," Trevin said. He looked at Kendra directly. "From your mother. And when I photographed it, so we had a record, you asked me to delete it." He let that sit for a moment. "I want you to hear what that is." Kendra flinched. Diane stepped forward into the room. Her face had gone flushed with the particular heat of someone who has long experience escaping accountability and can sense that the familiar exits are closed. "You were never right for this family. I said it before the wedding, and I will say it now. A man who invades every private corner, who photographs things he doesn't understand, who sets himself up as some kind of judge, that is not a partner. That is a problem." Trevin turned and faced her directly. He did not step toward her. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned and stood there, looking at her, with an expression she had not seen on him before. Because for 10 months, he had managed himself around Diane. He had adjusted his tone and chosen his moments and absorbed what she put into the room because he had believed, at some level, that patience was the responsible path. That belief was gone. "You put your hands on my daughter," he said. "You will not do it again." Diane slapped him. The sound was flat and final, the way sounds are in rooms that have gone completely silent for them. Kendra made a sharp, cut-off sound. Trevin did not move. He stood exactly where he was, with his feet on the floor and his hands at his sides, and he looked at Diane Pell with the kind of stillness that comes from a person who has finally stopped fighting the knowledge of exactly what they are dealing with. He touched nothing. He said nothing for several seconds. Then, "I'm done." 2 words. Quiet as anything he had said all night. He was looking at Kendra when he said them. He watched her face understand what they meant. He watched the color drain out of it slowly, like water leaving a basin. He went upstairs. Noelle was on the edge of her bed with her stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest. She had not cried, exactly, but her face held that careful, contained stillness that children build when they have learned that crying can make things worse. She looked at him when he came in and did not say anything. He sat beside her. He did not speak right away, and she did not ask him to. He just sat there in the room with her, present and solid, the thing in this house that was not going to shift. After a long time, Noelle leaned against his arm. He stayed there until her breathing evened out and her body went loose with sleep. He sat there a while longer after that, in the quiet room, with his daughter's weight against him and a knowledge of what tomorrow was going to look like settling into him the way cold settles into a room when the heat goes off. He was ready for it. The knock came 2 days later. It was a Tuesday afternoon, overcast, the kind of Ohio sky that cannot decide between gray and white, and ends up being both flat and close, and carrying the particular pressure of rain that has not yet committed. Trevin was in the kitchen with coffee he had poured and not touched when he heard the sound at the front door. He answered at point. Two people stood on the porch, both in plain clothes, both holding county identification lanyards. The woman introduced herself as Gail Torres, a family services investigator. The man beside her was a supervisor named Brett Hollis. They were polite and professional and gave no indication of anything except purpose. "We've received a report," Gail said, "regarding the welfare of a child at this address. We'd like to come in and speak with your family." Trevin held the door open and stepped back. Behind him, he heard Kendra come in from the hallway. She had been folding laundry in the bedroom, and the house was small enough that sounds traveled. He heard the sharp, involuntary intake of breath she made when she took in the people at the door. The color left her face with the speed of someone who had been simultaneously dreading and half expecting this exact moment for 2 days. Diane appeared from the kitchen doorway a moment later, drawn by the sound of the front door and the quality of the silence that followed it. "What is this?" she asked. "My name is Gail Torres," the investigator said. "We're with County Family Services." "I know what County Family Services is." Diane's voice had compressed into the specific register used when managing public situations, controlled, certain, performing calm. "I am asking why you are standing in our home. Someone made a call? Someone decided to make this family their business." She looked at Trevin with a gaze that carried everything she felt about him in that moment. "Was it you?" Trevin said nothing. "We're not here to discuss the source of the report," Gail said evenly. "We're here to speak with the child. We'd also like to speak with each adult separately. It's standard procedure, and it shouldn't take long." Noelle was upstairs. She had gotten home from school about 20 minutes ago and was changing out of her uniform in her room. Trevin could hear her small footsteps crossing the ceiling. Gail asked to speak with Noelle first, privately. Trevin walked them to the foot of the stairs and called up gently. Noelle appeared at the top landing a moment later, still in one sock, her backpack strap hanging off one shoulder. She looked down at the adults below her. Trevin kept his voice easy. "These are some people who want to talk with you for a bit. Just talk, okay? You can tell them anything that's true." He held her gaze for a moment. She understood him. She had always been good at reading him, at reading the difference between what he said and what he meant, the way children are when they have learned to pay close attention to the reliable adult in the room. She nodded and came downstairs. Gail and Brett took her to the living room. Trevin went to the kitchen. Diane was at the counter with her arms folded and her jaw set, working through the situation in real time. The calculation behind her eyes was visible if you knew what you were looking at. "This is your doing," she said. "Someone from Noelle's school made the report," Trevin said. He sat at the table. That information rearranged something in Diane's expression. She hadn't considered the school. He watched her recalibrate. "Teachers see bruises on a Monday morning," Trevin said. "Teachers ask questions. They are legally required to ask questions. Children fall," Diane said. Her voice had gone flat. Trevin looked at her across the kitchen. "You keep saying that. I notice you never wonder about her, though. How she's feeling. Whether she's scared. Just children fall. Like that's the end of it." Diane said nothing. She turned to the window. Kendra stood near the archway between the kitchen and the hall, not quite in either room. She had her arms wrapped around herself, and she was very still in the way she sometimes got when she was trying not to exist in a situation. They waited for nearly 45 minutes. From the living room, Trevin heard murmured voices, the careful, measured rhythm of an experienced interviewer giving a child space to speak. He sat with both hands on the table and did not move. When Gail came back to the kitchen, her face was composed in the way of someone who has trained themselves not to bring the content of a room into the next one. But her eyes were doing a specific kind of work. "We're opening a formal investigation," she said. Kendra made a sound. Diane stepped toward Gail immediately. On what basis? On the basis of one private conversation with a young child who could be confused, who can be led, who can repeat things she has overheard from an adult who has his own agenda in this family. She gestured toward Trevin. The investigation will determine what the basis is, Gail said. Her voice had not changed at all. That's the purpose of an investigation. I have been a member of this community for over 20 years, Diane said. I have worked in churches and schools and neighborhood organizations. I am not. You cannot walk in here and Diane. Trevin had spoken her name quietly, from his seat at the kitchen table, without standing up. She stopped, and in the silence after her name, something happened in Diane Pell's face that Trevin had never seen there in almost 2 years. The performance slipped. Beneath it, very briefly, he saw something that looked less like anger and more like fear. Real, private, unmanaged fear, the kind that belongs to a person who has just realized they are no longer the most powerful presence in the room. Then Noelle walked in from the hallway. She came in quietly, holding her stuffed rabbit by one ear. She reached the edge of the kitchen and looked around at the adults. She did not walk to her mother. She did not walk to Diane. She walked across the kitchen and stood behind Trevin's chair. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Kendra was watching her daughter choose where to stand in the room. The look on her face in that moment was something Trevin would remember for a long time, something that cracked deep in private and was covered quickly, but not before it registered. He filed it away carefully, the way he filed everything now. Gail left a card with the investigation timeline and the next steps. After the front door closed, the house held that particular quality of silence that settles over rooms after something has been said it cannot be taken back. Trevin waited. He told himself, with genuine effort, that the CPS investigation would be the moment that changed things. Then external, official confirmation of what he had been trying to communicate for months would finally break through whatever wall Kendra had built around herself. That she would look at Noelle, really look at her, and choose her daughter over the woman who had raised her on fear dressed up as love. He was wrong to in the days following Gail Torres's visit. Kendra moved through the house with a controlled, brittle energy that reminded Trevin of someone rehearsing for a performance they were not sure they could pull off. She was careful in a way that was itself noticeable, deliberate, measured, always slightly aware of being observed. He saw her on her phone late at night, after Noelle was in bed. He saw her slip into the bedroom and close the door when Diane called. He noticed small things disappearing. A folder of medical records that had been on the kitchen shelf, text message threads that had been on Kendra's phone, dates and appointments that no longer appeared on the shared calendar. And then, on a Wednesday evening, he heard it. He was passing Noelle's room on the way to the kitchen. The door was half open. It was past 9, and Noelle should have been asleep. He heard Kendra's voice, low, urgent, press close. Just tell them you fell. On the stairs. Say your shoulder was hurting from falling on the stairs, and Grandma was looking at it. Can you say that? Silence. Noelle, listen to me. Look at me. If they ask about Grandma, you tell them she never touched you, that she never hurt you. Okay, it's very important that you say that. Noelle's voice, small and careful. But she did, Mommy. A pause. Then Kendra's voice, lower now. Tight. I know. But sometimes we say things to protect the people we love. You understand? Sometimes that's what love means. Trevin stood in the hallway with his hand flat against the wall. That he stood there for a long time, that he had spent months holding onto a specific version of the situation. The version where Kendra was primarily a victim, someone shaped by years of living inside her mother's control until she could no longer clearly see the boundaries of it. That version was real. He believed it. He had compassion for it. But what he had just heard was not the behavior of a person who could not see clearly. What he had just heard was a deliberate choice, a fully conscious decision to sit beside a 6-year-old child and ask that child to protect the adult who had hurt her, whatever Kendra's history, whatever her trauma, whatever complicated and painful architecture had been built inside her over decades of living in Diane's orbit. This was a choice she had made tonight with full knowledge of what she was doing. Trevin walked back downstairs. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall and understood, with the specific clarity of something finally and completely resolved. That his marriage was over. He later heard more from Kendra's older cousin, Dolores, who reached out through a mutual contact and met with Trevin in a parking lot one afternoon. She was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had kept her distance from Diane for years and had clearly been waiting for a moment when speaking felt safe. She told him that Diane had abused Kendra growing up, not occasionally, not in small ways. The screaming, the sudden hands, the systematic dismantling of Kendra's confidence and judgment until she was entirely dependent on Diane's approval to know whether her own feelings were real. Dolores said Kendra had been living inside that system for so long she had no frame of reference outside it. Trevin heard all of it. He sat with it. He understood that this was a tragedy that went back decades, and that Kendra was, in a genuine sense, also one of Diane's victims. And then he set that understanding aside. His daughter came first. Whatever was true about Kendra's history, his daughter came first. Trevin filed the divorce papers on a Thursday morning, that he did it quietly, as he did most things that mattered to him. He sat in the office of family law attorney Andrea Cole, who was known in Maple Hollow's courthouse for being thorough in ways that opposing attorneys found uncomfortable. She had read through the folder of documentation Trevin had compiled and set it on her desk and looked at him with a careful assessment of someone measuring the weight of what she had just been given. "How long have you been documenting?" she asked. "Since last March," Trevin said, "when I saw the first bruise." Andrea leaned back. "Most people wait. They hope it won't get this far." "I hope too," he said, "but I documented anyway." She nodded once. "Good." That afternoon, Kendra received her copy of the filing. By evening, Diane was in the kitchen. Trevin came home from work to find them both at the kitchen table with papers and phones between them and a specific organized stillness that told him this meeting had been running for some time. Diane looked up when the door opened. Kendra did not. The days after the filing were methodical in the way that targeted campaigns are methodical. Within a week, the shared household account was emptied of the funds Trevin and Kendra had maintained for bills and expenses. His truck disappeared from the driveway 2 days after that. Kendra had been on the title for insurance reasons, and it was now parked at Diane's sister's lot across town. Trevin took ride shares to work and said nothing about it to Diane court. Kendra's attorney submitted a declaration describing Trevin as emotionally volatile, hostile behavior, and creating an unsafe environment in the marital home. The word volatile appeared 3 times. A signed statement from Diane herself described her son-in-law as controlling and threatening. Diane sat in the second row behind Kendra at every hearing. Back straight, hands folded, wearing the expression of dignified suffering that some people can maintain in public regardless of what their private behavior looks like. She looked like a grandmother standing by her family in a difficult time. She had always been very good at looking like whatever the room required. Andrea presented the documentation in full. Time-stamped photographs of bruises spanning 14 months of Noel's life. Subpoenaed text exchanges between Kendra and Diane discussing how to handle the CPS visit. Noel's pediatric records. A signed statement from Noel's school counselor describing her behavioral changes over the previous year. And the audio recording. Andrea played it in full in the courtroom. Trevin had captured it on his phone from the hallway outside Noel's bedroom on an evening when Diane had been left alone with her. The recording ran for close to 4 minutes. It was mostly ambient, shuffling, a television in another room, a child playing quietly the 3-minute mark. Diane's voice came through the phone speaker with the unmistakable clarity of a person who believed no one was listening. "You ruined my daughter's life the day you were born. Do you understand that? Everything that has fallen apart in this family, every single thing starts with you." A pause, then a sound sharp, sudden, something thrown or knocked from surface. Then Noel, crying with the specific, contained quality of a child who has learned to cry quietly. The courtroom went completely silent. The Honorable Patricia Reyes sat behind the bench with a stillness that was not passivity. She made a note in the careful, precise manner of someone who understands exactly what they are writing down to the defense table. Kendra had her hands pressed together in her lap, and her knuckles had gone white. Then she started crying, the silent, shaking kind that happens when a person is finally confronted with evidence that they cannot reframe inside their own mind. Evidence that makes the story they have been telling themselves impossible to finish. Diane sat very still. She did not cry. She did not look ashamed. She looked furious. That single expression, that unguarded, specific fury at being heard, told the courtroom everything that the recording had not. The week after the recording was played, the investigation widened. Andrea's paralegal, working through routine background searches, surfaced something that changed the shape of the entire case. Diane Pell had a sealed criminal record from the state of Kentucky, entered 11 years earlier. The charge was child endangerment involving a minor in her care, a nephew named Garrett, who was now an adult and who was, by all accounts, still deeply affected by what he had experienced in Diane's home. The record had been sealed as part of a civil agreement. Diane had never disclosed Kendra's family, to the CPS investigator, to the court, or to anyone. Critically, Kendra had known. This emerged through a letter Kendra had written to a family friend 8 years earlier, a woman named Pamela, who had been Kendra's closest friend before the friendship cooled under Diane's quiet pressure. Pamela had kept the letter. When she read the news coverage of Diane's arrest, she found the letter and handed it to investigators without being asked. In it, Kendra described the Kentucky incident carefully, in softened, protective language that still left the meaning entirely clear. She had known her mother had been charged with harming a child in her care. She had known when she invited Diane to move into a home with a 6-year-old. She had known when the CPS investigation opened. She had chosen, in each of those moments, to say nothing. That transformed the legal picture completely. Kendra was no longer a sympathetic figure caught between a controlling mother and a failing marriage. She was a person who had possessed direct knowledge of a child endangerment record, had concealed it through an active investigation, and had coached her own daughter to lie to investigators. She was, in the language that Andrea used in the follow-up brief, complicit. The hearing that followed was brief. Judge Reyes reviewed the full materials with the sustained focus of someone who takes the weight off these decisions seriously. Then she looked up and spoke. Emergency full custody to Trevin Garrison, effective immediately. Kendra's visitation suspended pending guardian ad litem review and a new scheduled hearing. No unsupervised contact between Kendra and Noel until further order of the court. Diane's arrest came 3 days after that. Investigators had connected her, through physical evidence and witness statements from 2 Maple Hollow families, to a pattern of behavior that extended well beyond what had happened in Trevin's home. The statements were specific and detailed and came from parents who had kept quiet for years because Diane was such a respected figure, such a constant church-going presence, such a voted community member. The morning of the arrest, Trevin was at Noel's school for a parent-teacher conference when Andrea called. He stepped into the hallway outside the classroom, listened, thanked her, and stood there for a moment. He did not feel the rush of triumph he might have expected. He felt something quieter, the particular stillness of a weight that has been carried for too long finally being set down. The absence of something he had been bracing against. That afternoon, he picked Noelle up from class. She ran across the sidewalk and held out her arms, and he picked her up. She usually protested this on the grounds of being too old for it, but today she wrapped her arms around his neck and did not protest at all that he drove them home through the late afternoon light. The house was quiet when they walked in. No raised voices. No one pacing the rooms. No small girl making herself invisible in the corners. Just the house. And his daughter. And the ordinary sound of the heat moving through the vents. The following afternoon, outside the courthouse, Trevin was walking to his car when he heard the commotion near the parking entrance. Deputies were escorting Diane out through the side doors. A small cluster of people had gathered, courthouse staff, a few reporters, several faces Trevin recognized from around town. People who had known Diane for years. People who were watching now with the specific expression of a community absorbing information it had perhaps been avoiding. Diane saw Trevin from across the lot. She tried to stop walking. The deputies kept her moving, but she turned toward him, and the expression on her face was the one she kept for moments when she had nothing left to perform with. She turned your daughter against us. Her voice carried across the concrete hard and clear. She poisoned all of it. She poisoned every part of this family, and you stood there and let it happen. Trevin stopped walking. He looked at her across the distance of the parking lot. Handcuffs on, hair loose from its usual set. All the dignity and authority she had maintained for so many years stripped entirely away now, until what was left was just a woman who had built her power on fear and was discovering what that power was actually worth when the fear was gone. No, he said. He said it quietly across the distance. Just that one word. You did. He got in his car and drove to pick up his daughter. County jail agreed with Diane, Pell the way a drought agrees with a garden. She had spent close to 6 decades building a version of herself that required other people's fear tossed to be standing. In every room she had ever occupied, family dinners, church committees, neighborhood organizations, school fundraisers, she had managed the people around her through a combination of guilt, controlled attention, and the constant background threat of her disappointment. Take away the room. Take away the audience. And what was left was just Diane. Without the structures she had always relied on to hold her up, finding out what she was made of when the architecture collapsed. Word traveled through Maple Hollow with the speed that important things travel through small towns. The Pell story had exactly the texture that sustains community attention. A domestic interior made suddenly and officially ugly. A sealed record from another state. Children harmed. A woman who had chaired the library fundraising committee and organized the church holiday drive and been cited by the town newsletter as an example of community dedication. Within 2 weeks of the arrest, the church group Diane had co-chaired quietly removed her name from all materials. The neighborhood women who had attended her craft evenings stopped being available when she called from the county phone. A woman from her block told someone at the hardware store that she had always sensed something wrong in the way Diane spoke about children who misbehaved, a coldness dressed up as principles. And within 48 hours, that observation had passed through enough conversations to feel, in the way these things always do in retrospect, like something the whole town had always quietly known. More families came forward. 3 sets of parents provided statements to investigators about incidents at community events over years, sudden grabbing, a vicious scolding delivered to a child who was not hers, a pattern of behavior that had always been dismissed because Diane was such a respected figure. Because she looked so much like a person who loved children. Because control, when it is performed with enough confidence, is very hard to distinguish from care. The reputation Diane had spent decades constructing collapsed with the specific speed of things that were never as solid as they appeared, built on performance rather than substance, dependent on an audience that had now turned away. Trevin did not follow the coverage closely. He was aware of it the way you are aware of rain and acidity. You have already left. Something happening somewhere that used to be relevant, now becoming background noise. He was entirely focused on Noelle. He found her a child therapist named Dr. Angela Mercer, who worked from a practice near the center of town with a waiting room that had plants on every surface and a bin of fidget toys beside the chair. Noelle went every Thursday afternoon. At first, she said almost nothing about the sessions when Trevin asked. Then gradually, over weeks, small reports began to surface at odd moments. During dinner one evening, Dr. Mercer says we can think of scary feelings like clouds that come and go on their own. During a car ride, Dr. Mercer has a plant she says is basically impossible to kill. She calls it her office plant, and she says it has survived everything. These small observations, delivered matter-of-factly, told Trevin that something was moving inside his daughter. Processing, finding language, finding frame that he listened to each of them with the full attention they deserved. They were not small things. They were evidence of a mind healing. School improved steadily. Noelle's teacher sent a note home after the first month saying she had been more present in class, more willing to participate, raising her hand again after weeks of sitting very still in the back of the room. Like a tea home, Trevin rebuilt the rituals deliberately. The nighttime routine. Saturday morning pancakes, blueberries in the batter, syrup on the side, exactly 4 pieces of fruit in a line on the plate. Every Saturday, without fail, the same sequence. He understood, as a practical matter, that what children need after instability is not grand gestures, but reliable small ones. The same small things repeated. The message delivered not through words, but through time. I am here. This is what tomorrow looks like. You can trust the floor point. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 weeks after the custody order, Trevin was at the kitchen table going through mail when he heard a sound from the living room. Noelle was drawing at the coffee table, pencils spread in a half circle around her. Sketchbook open. She was working with the absorbed focus of a child entirely inside her own imagination, and she was laughing. Easy, unmanaged. She had noticed something in her own drawing, some small funny thing that pleased her, and she laughed at it with no calculation, no awareness of the room, no eye toward whether it was safe. Trevin sat still at the kitchen table and listened. He had not heard that sound in so long. Free, unguarded, belonging entirely to her, that for a moment he could not immediately place it. And then he recognized it, and something that had been knotted in his chest for over a year came loose. He went back to sorting the mail. His eyes were stinging. He let them. Kendra Garrison had spent her entire life managing the distance between who Diane needed her tobe and who she actually was. It was exhausting work, and it had cost her things she had not always been aware she was paying. Her sense of her own judgment, her ability to trust her own instincts, her capacity to act on what she saw rather than on what she was told to see. All of it had been slowly, systematically ground down across decades of living inside her mother's requirements. For most of her life, Kendra had believed she was choosing. She believed that defending Diane was loyalty. She believed that closing ranks around the family was strength. She believed that the alternative, actually reckoning with what her mother was and what her mother had done, would be a form of annihilation she could not survive. She had been wrong about every part of that. The CPS findings became part of the public record once Diane's case entered the criminal justice system. School districts communicate with each other. Professional licensing bodies run background checks. Within 3 months of the initial filing, Kendra's position as a teaching assistant at Bridgewater Elementary, a job she had held for 4 years and had been genuinely skilled at, a job that had given her a sense of herself separate from her mother and her marriage, was quietly eliminated. The principal called her in on a Monday morning and used words like untenable circumstances and the importance of community trust, and Kendra sat across from him without arguing because she understood that argument was beside the point. She understood now, more broadly, that many arguments she had been making for years were beside the point. She found an apartment on the eastern edge of town, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building that smelled like old carpet. She moved in with 2 van loads of furniture and stood in the living room looking at the white walls and understood that this was what it felt like to be only herself. No Diane, no Trevin, no roles to perform for anyone, just the apartment and the woman inside it, and the work of becoming honest about what had happened. Diane called twice from the county jail. The first call was operational, lawyers, appeals, strategy, what Kendra needed to do and say and arrange. The same voice, the same authority, the same expectation of compliance that had structured Kendra's entire life. The second call came late at night, after lights out. It was different. It was the voice Diane used when she was not performing. Cold and precise, and designed to find the places that were softest. She blamed Kendra for everything. For Trevin, for the marriage, for the investigation, for the rest, for the public exposure. For being the kind of daughter who could not keep things together. For failing the family at every critical moment. The words were delivered with the practiced accuracy of someone who knew exactly where to place them. Kendra hung up. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark apartment and sat with the understanding she had been avoiding for years. It arrived not as relief, but as weight. The weight of seeing clearly after a long time of choosing not to. The dance recital was in February. Trevin had enrolled Noelle in a beginner's class after noticing that she liked to move to music in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. The recital was held in the school gymnasium. Folding chairs arranged in rows, fluorescent lighting, the particular smell of floor wax and coats still cold from outside. Kendra came. She had checked, quietly and through indirect channels, whether she was permitted to attend as a member of the public. She was. Trevin had been informed she might come. He did not object. He spotted her near the side door when he arrived, standing apart from the main seating, wearing a dark coat, holding her phone in both hands with the purposeless grip of someone who needs something to do with their hands. She looked tired in the particular way of someone to whom sleep is occurring, but rest is not. That he gave her a single nod. She nodded back. Noelle performed in the third group. Blue costume with a white sash. Second row from the left. She watched her feet more than she should have, the way beginners do when they're still learning to trust their body, to remember what the mind has practiced. But every so often she forgot to watch her feet, and in those moments she was simply moving, and she looked entirely, completely free. Trevin watched his daughter on that gymnasium stage and felt something settle inside him that had been moving for a very long time. After the recital, in the crowded lobby near the coat rack, Kendra found him. She looked like someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say and was already aware it was not enough. She danced beautifully, Kendra said. Her voice was quiet. Trevin said nothing. I made mistakes. She paused. I know that doesn't. Mistakes are forgetting birthdays, Trevin said. His voice was level and unhurried. Missing a school event because of a scheduling conflict. What happened to Noelle was not a mistake. You sat in her room and told her to lie to investigators. You hit a record that directly affected whether she was safe in her own home. You made those choices, Kendra, not your mother. You. Kendra's eyes filled. You don't understand what she did to me, what she built inside me. I was so deep inside all of it for so long that I couldn't see. I do understand, Trevin said. She stopped. I understand what she did to you. I have thought about it a great deal, and I am genuinely sorry for what your childhood was. He paused, but that understanding does not change what you chose to do with it. You're not 6 years old. You are an adult who knew what was happening to your daughter and chose to protect the person who was hurting her. Kendra started crying quietly, not performatively, just grief doing what grief does. Trevin stood with her for a moment. Get help, he said. Real help. Not for us. For yourself. Because you cannot give Noelle anything from where you currently are, and she's going to need her mother to be a whole person someday. He looked at her carefully. If you do that work, really do it, we can talk about what a relationship with her looks like. But that starts with you, and it starts now. He walked back to where Noelle was waiting by the gymnasium exit, still wearing her blue costume, still flushed from dancing, bouncing slightly on her heels. He took her hand, and they walked out into the cold February night. But he did not look back. Not out of cruelty, out of the understanding, earned over a very long time, that looking back was what kept people in rooms they needed to leave. 8 months after the custody order, on a Tuesday in early October when the Ohio trees were beginning to turn at their edges, yellow and orange coming in at the tips, the last of the summer green holding on in the centers, Trevin put the Maple Hollow house on the market. IT sold in 12 days. He had spent the previous month making calls and doing research with the same methodical attention he brought to anything that mattered. School district ratings, cost of living, commute to Mito, the nearest city of any size. And then something less quantifiable, the quality of the air in a place, the weight of it, whether standing on a street gave you the feeling of breathing or the feeling of holding your breath. That he found a small house near Lake Harmony in northern Michigan. A cottage, really, 3 bedrooms, a covered porch running the full length of the front face of the house, a yard that opened at the back into a stand of birch trees, their white trunks catching the afternoon light in a way that felt specifically and deliberately peaceful. The previous owner had left a bird feeder mounted on the back post. On the afternoon, Trevin walked the property for the inspection. 2 chickadees worked the feeder with the settled, unhurried authority of animals who have lived somewhere for a long time and see no reason to doubt that they will continue to. Noelle stood on the porch steps and looked at the yard with the careful attention she gave to things she was deciding about. There's a whole bird, she said. There are 2 birds, Trevin said. One is behind the feeder. She squinted for a moment. I see the other one now. She turned around and looked up at him. Can we paint my room? What color? She gave this the full weight of a serious decision. Yellow, but the kind that's not too much yellow, like the morning kind. Morning yellow, Trevin said. We can find that. They moved in the second week of October. The town of Lake Harmony had just over 4,000 residents and a downtown that ran for about 8 blocks along the main road. A hardware store with the same family name on the sign for 30 years. A bakery that closed at noon and sold out of everything before it did. A library with a parking lot perpetually too small for the number of people who used it. An ice cream shop that stayed open into November on the principle that cold weather and ice cream were not mutually exclusive. Trevin liked the town immediately. It felt like a place that had no particular interest in performing itself for anyone. Noelle started at Harmony Elementary the following Monday. She came home on the first day with a drawing she had made of her new classroom and a namesoft two girls she had sat with at lunch. She had written them carefully at the top of the drawing in her best printing. Trevin put the drawing on the refrigerator with a lighthouse magnet that had come with the house, stuck in a junk drawer, and which he had kept because it seemed like a good thing to keep. The mornings there were different from anything the house on Birchwood Lane had been, even in the early years before Diane, before the weight of everything that followed. In Maple Hollow, even after the divorce was final and Diane was gone and the worst of it was over, the house had held something that took Trevin a long time to name properly. A residue, like smoke remaining in a room after the fire has been dealt with. You could move through it. You could stop noticing it, mostly. But it was always there in Lake Harmony. The mornings were just mornings, coffee that he drank while it was still hot. Light through the kitchen window that was broader than Ohio light, spreading differently, falling across the counter in a way that felt generous. A quiet that was genuine, not the held, careful quiet of a house bracing for something, but the easy quiet of a house that had nothing to brace for. Noelle continued her sessions with Dr. Mercer over video call. Same Thursday slot, same careful and patient work. Trevin kept the schedule consistent. He noticed that she emerged from sessions sometimes needing to draw, needing to move, needing the hands to do something that the words had started. He would make tea and sit nearby and be available without pressing that he did not think much about the past. Not because he was avoiding it, but because the life in front of him was genuinely full and the past had been resolved. He had done what needed to be done. His daughter was healing, visibly, measurably real. That was all the accounting he required. One evening in December, the first substantial snow came to Lake Harmony. IT arrived after dark, announced by a change in the quality of the silence outside, the particular muffled depth that snow gives to night. Trevin built a fire in the living room fireplace, which had a good draw and a stone surround that the previous owners had maintained carefully. He made hot chocolate from actual cocoa powder, because the packets tasted like chalk, and Noelle had said so with the directness that children reserve for bad food. Noelle came downstairs in her socks and her sleep shirt and pulled the quilt from the back of the couch with the practiced efficiency of a person who has done this before and intends to do it again many times. She arranged it over both of them and settled against his arm, and looked at the fire and then at the window. Outside, the snow fell in the specific, unhurried way of snow that intends to stay steady, complete, softening every edge of the world it touched. For a while they just sat with it. "Grandma can't come back anymore, right?" Noelle asked. Her voice was matter-of-fact, the voice she used when she already knew the answer and just needed it confirmed by someone reliable. "Never," Trevin said. "She's in jail." "She is." Noelle nodded once. She looked at the fire for a moment, watching the wood shift. "And Mommy?" Trevin was quiet for a moment. The question sounded like the first one, but was different in a way both of them felt. Noelle's feelings about Kendra were complicated in the way only childhood losses are complicated. The kind where you love someone and have been hurt by them, and are still young enough to be trying to fit both things together without knowing yet whether they can be. "She has to fix herself first," Trevin said. "Like how Dr. Mercer helped me fix things." Something like that. A different kind of help, but the same basic idea. She has to find the honest version of herself and start from there. Noelle considered this with the serious, deliberate attention she gave to things that mattered. "Is she doing it?" she asked. "The fixing?" "I hope so," Trevin said. "I really, honestly hope so." Noelle nodded slowly. Then she leaned her head back against his arm, pulled the quilt tighter around them both, and went back to watching the snow come down outside the window. Trevin sat there with the fire going and his daughter's weight warm against his side, and the snow falling on the birch trees in the yard, and the whole house quiet around them. The genuine, unguarded quiet of a space that had finally become what it was supposed to be. That he thought about Maple Hollow. He let himself, just briefly, The dinner table, and the spilled milk, and the bathroom bruises, and the months of fighting to protect a child who should have never needed protecting from the people inside her own home. He held it all in his mind for a moment, the way you hold something before you finally set it down for the last time. Then he let it go, miles south, across the state line, in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Maple Hollow. Kendra Garrison sat at her kitchen table alone. The parking lot lamp outside cast its pale circle on the snow below her window. The apartment was warm and very still. The particular stillness of a space where one person lives and is becoming honest with herself inside it, which is some of the hardest work a person can do. She had started therapy 6 weeks ago. She had driven to the first appointment alone, parked a block away from the office out of old habit she had not yet unlearned, sat in a chair that was more comfortable than she expected, and cried for the first 40 minutes without finding any words. The therapist had not seemed surprised. Kendra was beginning to understand, slowly and with some difficulty, why. She sat now with a cup of tea that had gone cold and thought about the choices she had actually made. Not the ones that fear had dressed up as love. Not the ones that Diane had navigated her into. The actual ones, the ones that were hers, made with full knowledge that had cost her daughter something real. She thought about the hallway, the half-open door, her own voice, asking a 6-year-old child, Tosi, the bruises were not there. She sat with that for a long time. She did not look away from it. She had told herself, for most of her life, that what Diane wanted and what she herself wanted were the same thing, because it was easier than the alternative. Because the alternative had always felt like falling into something with no visible bottom. She could see the bottom now. The bottom was a small yellow room in a house near a lake in northern Michigan. A girl with curly hair and her father's posture, sleeping without fear. A house that was quiet in the way houses are quiet when they have nothing to hide. That was what she had traded. There was no version of I didn't know better, no version of I was afraid, no version of I was shaped this way from the beginning. None of it changed what the trade had cost. But she was learning, slowly and with great effort, to live honestly rather than comfortably. To sit with what she had done and not flinch from it, and let that honesty be the thing she built the next version of herself from. That was not enough, but it was something, and from something, under the right conditions, with enough time, with enough willingness to stay in the discomfort without escaping, something can grow into something else. Outside, the snow kept falling on everything. On the parking lot, on the courthouse, on the county jail, on the cottage near the lake where a father and his daughter sat together by a fire, warm and unhurried, watching the world go white, covering all of it in the same patient, even white, the way snow does when it is not distinguishing between what happened and what didn't. When it is simply falling, the way all things fall in their time, and covering the ground below with something clean and new and ready for what comes next.